Hi guys, welcome back to Read Instead. I'm Jake. Glad to have you here today. We're back in the home library here. The last video I made, we were outside. Hope you guys enjoyed that video on Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I figured any high school kids out there that need to write a paper on that particular book, I believe it's high school reading material, go ahead and check that video out. But today we're gonna get back into my 5-star reads off my Goodreads page. There's only about 22 of them, something like that. But having said that, that brings us today to a novel that is very near and dear to my heart. I read it probably 2.5 years ago, something like that. It's Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. Let's talk about it. Okay, so Boy's Life. This is about a boy named Corey, and he is living in Alabama, and I believe this takes place in the 50s. Corey is a young boy, and I would say the coolest part about this novel, if I could just lay it all out for you in just a few sentences, not the plot or anything, but the reason why I think so many people connect with this novel is that it induces a sense of innocence and nostalgia that can bring any adult back to their childhood memories. And I believe, most of us every now and again reflect on those times of innocence and those those nostalgic feelings that we can get. So when I go, just for me personally, when I go back to my mother's house and the house that I grew up in, which is just a town over, and I go down to a park that is right next to my mother's house, again, the house that I grew up in, and this is a park that I spent, accumulatively, I probably spent like a couple years of my life down there, to actual time wise, the amount of hours that I actually spent down there during the summers growing up. There was a great program in the city that I grew up in where they would actually have paid employees. They were called park instructors, where they would just spend the whole day down at the park sort of organizing games and activities and things like that with the kids there. And I remember those times so vividly. I remember we used to take a wiffle ball bat and we'd wrap some duct tape around it, and we'd play baseball with a tennis ball. We'd actually play it on the basketball court. And I can still to this day remember at 36 years old, I remember that feeling of connecting perfectly with that wiffle ball bat and that tennis ball, and just sending it flying. I can remember smelling the dandelions, walking down there to the park, and obviously I have so many more memories. I'm not going to share them all now, but this book induces those memories, that sense of nostalgia that is really, I think, it's enjoyable, but it can also be beneficial, I think, for us as adults to reflect on those times once in a while. Corey's the main character in this book. He is he's an only child, and he comes from it's a 1950s Southern traditional family, conservative maybe, if you want to call them that. He says yes sir and no sir and yes ma'am and no ma'am to his parents. It's that kind of a household. So pretty much right at the beginning of the book, something happens. Right, he is driving with his dad. His dad is a milkman. He's bringing his early morning deliveries, and Corey is made to come with him. It's the summertime. He's out of school, so he needs to help his dad make these deliveries. And his dad's trying to obviously sort of teach him some work ethic and stuff like that. And they're coming around a bend in their milk truck, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this car just flies in front of them and is way out of control and almost hits them, and they go off the road. Luckily, they're safe, but this car continues to go and ends up in a lake. And there's someone inside, and they were already, it seems as though they were already dead. They were, if I remember correctly, their hands were tied and stuff like that to the steering wheel. and the car plunges into the lake. And this sort of starts a murder, mystery, homicide investigation throughout in the town. And that's sort of like the overlying story that takes place in this novel and continues to the end. But the main meat of the story and the aspect of this novel that has been was so enjoyable for me to read, and that has stuck with me since I've read it, and will probably stick with me the rest of my life. That's why it's a 5-star read for me, is the way in which Robert McCammon writes through the perspective of a 11-year-old boy. And I'll give you an example of this. So Corey has a small handful of friends, just 2 or 3 friends that he's really close with, and they all sort of have their own identity, their strong identity. One kid is a sort of a quiet Native American kid who is sort of picked on for his ethnicity, but he's very he collects he finds what do you call them, bow and arrow, the pins on the end, the actual arrows that he finds them on the ground, and he collects them and stuff like that. And he's kind of made fun of for this. There's another kid who's a little, he's a little chunky, and so they all sort of have their own identities, and they get along well. So there's this chapter in the novel where they all head out on their own to a carnival that has come to town, and they go to this exhibit that is portrayed as inside there's a triceratops, I believe that's what you call it, the dinosaur with the 3 horns, right? And that's what it's portrayed as. So as boys, they go in, and I remember the trainer or the guy running the exhibit is like really cruel to the animal. He's like smashing it in the back and stuff like that. And they go in to this exhibit, and they just kind of get like a bird's eye view of this thing. It's not the guy running the exhibit doesn't really show them the creature, fully, doesn't give them a good view of it, right? And all they sort of see, and they're like young boys, and they're kind of just peering over the cage, and they see a horn coming up, and they see the big back of the animal and stuff like that, and they end up leaving the exhibit. And as a reader, like, you're reading it and you catch on to the fact that it's a rhinoceros in there, but the boys still believe that it's a triceratops because they didn't get a good view of it, and they probably, I don't know how, they're not animal experts. It's like 11-year-old boys in rural Alabama in the 1950s. They were. You could understand that they'd be convinced that it's actually a triceratops. Well, and then later in the night, one of the boys, because the trainer had treated the rhinoceros so badly, and was like whipping it in the back, just smashing it in the back with some sort of whip or something. One of the boys goes back in the middle of the night and breaks into the carnival and releases the rhinoceros, and the rhinoceros actually shows up later in the book, but I won't talk about that. But that just gives you an example. That gives you an example as to how Robert McCammon sort of writes the novel. Is that he just perfectly writes with the mindset of an 11-year-old boy, and what kind of things would be triggering, and what would stir emotion, and what kind of cares and worries would you have as an 11-year-old boy. I will tell you, there have been plenty of novels that have moved me emotionally. There's only been one novel where a tear from my eye actually fell on the page, and that's Boy's Life by Robert McCammon right here. I don't want to go into the scene in too much detail, but I'll just tell you that Corey and one of his friends are having a conversation in a hospital room and then in a hospital bed. And the innocence, I get choked up just talking about it, but the innocence of the conversation, but in reality how dire and dramatic the circumstance really is, those two things sort of tied together. It was just very emotional to read. Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. If any of the things that I talked to you guys about today is something you'd be interested in, if you feel yourself forgetting your youth, if you haven't had a sense of nostalgia for the senses and the smells, the emotions that you felt as a kid growing up, and you want to tap back into that, for some reason this book just brings out those feelings. And not to mention the whole, as you remember, I mentioned there's a whole murder mystery, homicide investigation that continues throughout the novel, and that's entertaining too. And that sort of climactically all comes to a head at the end. And Corey, our boy in this book is right in the thick of it. So enjoyable from beginning to end. A 5-star read for me. A Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. I hope you guys check it out. I'll talk to you again soon. Take care.